In this lesson, we're going to continue to build out our AJAX call. So I'm going to minify this or shrink it down a little bit because we don't necessarily need to see what our JSON data is. So essentially it was just that same data that we copied and pasted. So all it is just essentially a data file. So we don't really need to take a look at that. So I'm going to just close this down a little bit so we don't so we can focus in on the JavaScript code. Still got that open here at the bottom, but we've closed it down. Now, one of the things that we need to look at, once we make our open connection, we notice that our ready state did change. So there's another one that we're going to look at, and we're going to look at the object here. So the object ready state change. And if this fires off, if ready state does change, then we're going to run through this function. So maybe for now, we can just console log out A. So essentially, once the ready state changes, then we're going to console log out A. And I'm going to get rid of that second one there. So let's refresh, and we see that our ready state actually changed 3 times. So the first time, we've got ready state 4 and we've got ready state 4. So essentially there's been 4 changes. So this is the process that we're going through, but we want to make sure that we isolate out that we're only going to ready state 4. So we had seen in the previous video that our ready state can change to 1 if we're not doing the send and so on. So we want to make sure that we did so not only that we've initiated this connection, that we've had a successful connection. And that's where we can use this in order to identify the current ready state. So this is again another value that we're pulling out of the object, and we're going to take a check and see if it's equal to 4. And if it is equal to 4, then we're going to output something within this condition. So maybe if it's equal to 4, then we'll output the console log of A. And we see that now it only goes to 1 time, because once the ready state equals 4, that means we've opened up that connection and we've retrieved back that data. So now we're ready to actually pull back all of this response text. So I can see that I've got some response text there, and I can use this in order to identify it. So let's just update it like this, and we can see that essentially it's going to be the same thing as the A, but this is going to make it more dynamic and give us more flexibility when we're working with the various objects. So response text is the one that we're looking for. So response text. And save that and show you how that outputs. So here we're pretty much back to where we were in the previous lesson, where we've got a string value. So this response text, and essentially what we're doing at this point is we're just reading through the value there that's being returned. So now we have an option to parse it back into JSON format. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to set up that same variable object, and I'm going to parse that returned data into JSON format. So let's take that, paste that in, and output object in the console. So now I'm going to go and refresh it, and there we have our returned object from our JSON file. So now it's just a matter of working through it and looping through it as we did in the earlier lesson, and maybe we want to do the same thing where we just want to output all of that content. So I'm going to go ahead and set up the loop for that. So again, we're going to start out with I, and we're going to look at the default value of I, and so we're going to set it to 0, and then loop it while I is less than object length. And here we have that object length, and this is why we use the dynamic length, because this will change depending on how many objects, we get returned back in our response. So if we had 100 items being returned back or 5 items, we could dynamically adjust with the loop in JavaScript. So now we're just going to increment it and do our addition there, or concatenating together to my container. So I'm going to add to the my container, and the object information is contained in object, and as we loop through I, that's when we're going to pull back that information. At this point we have access to all of this object information, so I'm going to go back in and I'm going to grab that first name and the last name. So I'm going to go open up the name object, and then within there we've got first name and last name. So I'm going to add in the space, and it's going to look essentially the same as it did within the last lesson. So add in the I, and again go to name, and this time we're going to go into last. And I believe we also added in a line break in the last one, so let's do the same for this one. And then over here, what I need to do is just set that document getting element by ID, selecting the element where I want to output that content. So I just want to output it to output and inner HTML, and all I need to do now is equal it to my container, and close that off. Go back out here and refresh it, and now we can see that we're getting this object data being pulled in from the JSON file. So take another look at this JSON file. We can see that if I make some updates to it, save it, refresh it, we automatically get those updates coming into our JavaScript, and we can make use of it. So in the next lesson, we're going to take this one step further, and we're going to actually connect to one of these external JSON files and maybe pull this data in dynamically into our JavaScript, and then use it as an object and make use of the data that we're pulling in. So it's coming up in the next lesson.